Dave and Ben can speak more specifically to it. I would see what they say first.
Yeah.
But I know my customer class, which is small to medium.
Yeah.
You never run into it when everyone would have one.
Right,
One.
exactly.
And if you had one, you'd be like, get rid of this. Put that in, let's do something different with your phone.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
No, no. Craig just came over, and I know that we had a dedicated line.
Hey guys.
There.
Yeah. Hey everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight. Those of you who've shown up, we really appreciate you coming to our meetings. Pamela's here, good. Okay, I call the meeting to order and I'd like to read the Aboriginal Acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the land of which we gather is traditional territory of the Tanaha, Seleks and the Senex peoples and is home to the Métis and diverse Aboriginal persons. We honour their connection to the land, rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. And I'd just like to ask if there's any late items. None? Okay. Adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Woodward. Councillor Page. Questions or comments? Hearing none. All in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. Recommendations from the Committee of the Whole. There are none. And the first item on the agenda is a development variance permit on Pine Street. There's a development service has received an application to vary the zoning bylaw number 3199 2013 and the off-street parking landscape bylaw number 3274 2013 for construction of a 4-unit residential building. And council is asked to consider the variances. The staff report is in your package. And there's a recommendation. There's actually 2 of them actually. At the end, and if there's somebody who wishes to move, Councillor Page, second by Councillor Renwick. Any questions or comments? Councillor Anderson.
Make sure I'm actually on the right one.
Okay, it's Pine.
Yes, I know. I'm just trying to get something highlighted.
So the recommendation is the application for the development various permit to vary the requirement.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I'm fine with it in general. My question just is why are we removing vegetation when we could be removing parking spaces? And why are we making that call and that distinction?
Through to staff.
Through to staff, thank you.
Hi, Sebastian Arcan with the Planning Department. It's a bit of a tight lot. It's a bit of an awkward lot. As I mentioned in the report, they are within the density requirements, so they can't go below 3 or above 5. They're at 4. But that 4 units triggers the requirement for 7 parking stalls. And in that location, not having parking stalls would create issues because then there's not great on-street parking just because of the topography of the street. So in this case, it was deemed better to remove the vegetation buffer and allow for parking on site. You're welcome.
Further questions or comments? Okay, just so we're all clear, we're on number 1, which is the zoning bylaw 3199 2013, 427 R2 medium density residential zone, interior side lot setback reduction from 3 to 2.74 meters. All in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. And number 2 is the off-street parking and landscape bylaw number 3274, 2013 10.3, general landscape requirements, vegetative buffer of 3.3 meters to be removed to accommodate the parking area. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Renwick, Councillor Page. Questions or comments? I think we had your question answered, Councillor Anderson. All in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. The next one is 602 Kootenay, and it's a development service has received an application to vary the zoning bylaw 3199 2013 to allow for residential dwelling located below the commercial space in C1 in the C1 zone. And there's an extensive staff report. And there's one recommendation here. Excuse me?
Sorry, I wish to declare at this time that I'm not entitled to participate in the discussion or vote on the next item of business before the meeting, that this item is, whatever number it is on the agenda, by reasons of perceived conflict of interest, and that I wish to leave the meeting at this time and request that the minutes record my leaving the meeting for the above stated reasons.
Thank you very much. And don't go too far, you're going to have to come back. Okay, that the application for a development variance permit to vary the requirements of the zoning bylaw 3199/2013 to allow for residential use below the commercial use on the subject property be approved for lot 11 and 12, block 93, plan NEP 9500, district lot 95, 602 Kootenay Street as follows. The zoning bylaw number 3199/2013, section 614, to vary the requirement that a residential use must be located above or to the rear of the non-residential use. Are you clear on that? Moved by Councillor Lochtenberg, second by Councillor Page. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I do have a question about this one. Like Councillor Anderson, I don't really have a problem with this particular one, but I was looking at the variances that we are getting and wondering if we shouldn't have a report from staff on whether it makes sense to look at the fees and charges we're charging people for these, and whether they should be directed into the Housing Affordability Fund.
I think there's something in the agenda later about that, actually.
Well, so fees and charges can only be cost recovery. We have to look at the reason why we have these fees and charges. So it's staff time, advertising, etc. You can't use fees and charges to fund something else. So that just, you couldn't do that.
Okay.
And for context as well, too, briefly on the cost of variance application. For example, with this one, I think we had to mail out 120 or so envelopes for the 60-meter neighbor notice. So there are clear costs that come with that.
Okay, that was my only question.
That's good. Okay. And I think later on the agenda, there is some adjustments to fees and charges anyway in some of our.
Yeah, so again, just for council, is fees and charges are, they're not a revenue generating exercise for local governments. You have to justify them for your costs of providing that service. That's the principle.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thanks very much.
I'll go get Janice.
Go get Janice. Vernon, that was Vernon Street, right? Oh, Kootenay, sorry. Can everybody hear okay out there? Okay, good. Thank you. So this is a development variance permit application at 705 Vernon Street. Development Service has received an application to vary the zoning bylaw 3199/2013 for an extension of a patio deck. And again, there's an extensive report from staff, and thanks Pamela and your staff for doing a great job in delivering some good information to help us. And there's a recommendation that Council pass the following resolution, that the application for a development variance permit to vary the requirements of the zoning bylaw 3199/2013 to allow for the construction of a single larger deck on the subject property be approved for Lot 1, District Lot 95, Kootenay District Plan 15406, 705 Vernon Street as follows. Zoning bylaw number 3199/2013, section 618, reduced the side setback from 3 meters to 1.5 as per attached plan. I need a mover and a seconder, if possible. Councillor Morrison, second by Councillor Woodward. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. Okay. Okay, next is a Nelson Kootenay. Now I can see the back of the room.
Whoa.
Right. All right. Nelson Kootenay Lake Tourism, Nelson Regional Sports Council, Nelson Athletic Association, and Bill and Bill McDonnell's letter requesting that the city consider acknowledging the sports-related ambassador as part of an existing cultural ambassador program. And of course, again, there's a brief report here, and there are options and alternatives. However, the staff recommendation is that council directs staff to further research and analyze the request to acknowledge the sports-related ambassador with regards to a request to possible benefits and disadvantage and costs and other impacts. Does that sound fair? If it sounds fair, please somebody move it. Councillor Page, second by Councillor Anderson. Hearing no questions or,
I have a comment.
okay, comment, okay.
Yeah, so I just noticed that they had talked about sort of oscillating between like the cultural ambassador and the sports ambassador.
Yeah.
And I would like staff to potentially consider having both every year. I think that there's a real opportunity here. It hardly costs us any money. You know, we have a huge sports community. I don't see why we couldn't have a cultural ambassador and a sports ambassador every year.
There you go.
That's definitely what we'd look into for sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Anderson. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Carried, thanks very much. Okay, where are we now? We're on the amendment procedures bylaw. And thanks for working to clear up a lot of this stuff, Pamela. There's a lot of stuff.
This one's Sarah's.
Sarah's? Oh, cool,
Yeah, this
Sarah,
one.
thank you.
Ham does a lot of things, but
Yeah,
not
doesn't
everything.
do this, okay. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. You have to update this stuff every once in a while. And it seems in Nelson we have to do it on a regular basis, where things change so fast. The City Council Procedures Bylaw, oh, there you go. 3184-2011 requires a minor amendment to change the order of proceedings so that council reports will be included in the committee of the whole meeting agenda rather than the regular meeting. So in other words, you want to stop council from rambling on at the end of the regular meeting and move it to the committee of the whole meeting.
And I'll move that because that was
your
my
idea?
my idea.
I'll
So I'd
second
like to
that.
move that.
And Councillor
My
Renwick
amendment.
is going to second that. And that's number one. We'll do them separately, Kevin, or do you do them together?
No, you have to do the
Separately,
first
okay,
reading
yeah.
first. Yeah.
That the Corporation of the City of Nelson Council Procedures Amendment Bylaw 3447, 2019 be read a first and second time by title only. All in favor? Carried. And next, we need a seconder for number two, please. Councillor Morrison and Councillor Anderson. That the Corporation of the City of Nelson Council Procedures Amendment Bylaw 3447, 219, 2019 be read a third time by title only. All in favor? Carried. Thanks very much. All right. Oh, here you go.
Now you can thank.
Now we can
Yeah.
thank Pamela on the sign bylaw. God, that thing comes up a lot. At the March 4th, 2019 regular meeting, the new sign bylaw number is a new sign bylaw 3437 for 2019 was introduced and received for the first three readings. A council resolution finally adopted the bylaw and is now adoption of the bylaw is now required.
Moved.
Moved by Councillor Morrison,
Second.
second by Councillor Renwick. And this is the final reading. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Carried, good. And just want to make sure that was nothing else there, okay. Thank you very much. Here's another one from Development Services, Sidewalk Café. And March the 4th, regular meeting, the new Sidewalk Café bylaw number 3441 in 2019 was introduced and received for the first of three readings, and council resolution now to finally adopt the bylaw is required. So we have already dealt with this, and unless there's any further questions or comments, I'd like a motion to adopt the
Moved.
Councillor Morrison, Councillor Page, that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Sidewalk Cafe bylaw number 3441 2019 be finally adopted. All in favor? Carried. Thanks very much. Oh, this was a tough one. I spent most of the afternoon trying to read this word here. And I don't,
Consequential.
consequential, I got it down here, I got it abbreviated actually. Consequential amendments. related to the sign bylaw. As part of the adoption of the new sign bylaw and Sidewalk Café bylaw, a number of city bylaws have to be amended. The following bylaws require amendments to assure that it's consistent with the sign and Sidewalk Café bylaw. And again, as you can see, we talked about fees and charges. There's some background information on that as well. There's been a few adjustments there. And Kevin, you want each one of these individually? It looks like
Yeah, we should have
it looks
division,
like that
please.
because there's final adoption, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so division.
So there's a list here of, and I'm going to ask for a motion on each one by number because you've read them all. So motion to approve number 1. If there's a mover and a seconder, that'd be great. Councillor Woodward and Councillor Anderson. Questions or comments? Hearing none. All in favour? Thank you very much. Number 2, Councillor Renwick and Councillor Page. Okay. Questions or comments? Hearing none. All in favour? Got to balance the table out a little bit, you guys. Number 3, the Corporation of the City of Nelson. Bylaw. Go.
I noticed
No.
that.
Councillor Renwick,
So-
Councillor Anderson. All in favour? Carried. And number 4, mover and a seconder, Councillor Page, Councillor Lochtenberg.
Sure.
All in favour? Carried. 5. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Renwick and Councillor Page, all in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. 2 more to go. Number 6, Councillor Morrison. Councillor Renwick, all in favour? Carried. Thank you. Number 7, Councillor Lochtenberg and Councillor Page, all in favour? Carried. Thanks very much.
So do you feel useless?
Exciting stuff.
Feel good, we debated these already.
No, I know we did. I was
just
joking.
That was a long list of goodies. And the next one up is for the Area Association of Kootenay Boundary Local Government. And it's to be put on the floor for the convention coming up in Castlegar. And it's before the climate change workshop on March the 1st, 2019. Council adopted in principle a private forest lands regulation resolution for submission to the Association of Kootenay Boundary Local Governments, AKBLG, in advance of the 2019 AKBLG Annual General Meeting in Castlegar. And it's sitting here in front of you folks for mover and a seconder if you're willing to move this forward. No, just arms going up. Well, you brought it forward, so I'm going to give you the mover and you'll be the seconder. So Councillor Lochtenberg and Councillor Woodward. Any questions or comments? Hearing one. Councillor Morrison.
It's not so much that, it's just that we've moved this and the public doesn't get to hear it, so I think that the therefore be it resolved needs to be read
I'll read it.
for the benefit of the public.
Okay.
Yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
read it. Okay. So the Corporation of the
I
City.
understand the actual resolution. Is
Resolution, yeah,
Yes,
because,
very good, yeah.
so it should be read out loud.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the Corporation of the City of Nelson, whereas many local governments in rural BC are surrounded by significant amounts of forested private land, and whereas local governments are expected to manage the assets that support the value of their communities, which include sightlines, municipal infrastructure, slope stability of land, and watersheds, therefore be it resolved that the UBCM call upon the province to implement regulations and standards that are equivalent to Crown forest land regulations and standards that address forest harvesting for commercial purposes on private lands, and grant local governments the authority to require private landowners to undertake annual consultations with local governments to provide information regarding long-term dispositions or development intentions for land adjacent to municipal boundaries if intended for commercial purposes.
Thank you very much.
Now we can
All in
vote.
favor?
Sorry, just to let people know where we ended up here. Remember that Fernie asked us to support a resolution that they were bringing forward. That one was strictly regarding private managed forest lands.
Yeah.
And it didn't cover private lands that weren't under that act. And Sarah was able to work with the AKBLG folks and craft this that is we feel more encompassing, it would cover both.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
All in favor? Carried, thanks very much. So just so for the public's interest, the process works like this. We pass the resolution, it goes to the local association of local governments in the Kootenay, Columbia area and boundary. And should it pass on that floor, then it'll be moved forward to the Union of BC Municipalities, which is provincial-wide. If it passed on that floor, then the Union of BC Municipalities Board of Directors will be obligated to bring it forward to Victoria, to the provincial government for action, or not, depending on how they feel. Okay, thank you very much. And Laneway Housing pre-review. This is interesting concept, Pamela. See, very interesting. So, Development Services proposing a design competition. Is it in order to select 3 pre-reviewed sets of plans for Laneway Housing? Sounds like a pretty good idea. We'll be interested to see how the competition goes. So there is a resolution on here, folks, for anyone that wants to.
Do you want
Alex?
Alex?
Yeah, maybe give us a bit of background, Alex.
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions myself, but I'm sure you'll address them in your conversation. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. I'll go with my presentation then. We've been talking about laneway housing here in Nelson for a couple of years now.
No, try about 15.
especially. And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of really good things that, to like about laneway housing, particularly from the perspective of Nelson's long-range plans in the OCP, thinking about, neighborhood scale and gentle densification and the way that laneway housing can fit, within existing neighborhoods, blocking views, and kind of fitting into what, currently exists while still adding housing. Creating dynamic streets and using the limited land that we have in Nelson. Laneway housing has been permitted on the books in the zoning bylaw since 2013. Prior to that, there were a couple of them that kind of came up and indirectly, so to say. In 2013, the new zoning bylaw allowed them for up to 5 meters high, which is usually just 1 story in most cases, and 700 square feet. And then for the next few years after that, we had a few more permits trickling in. Last summer, Council amended the zoning bylaw as pertains to laneway housing to allow for 2-story laneway houses that go through a development permit and more square footage and et cetera, a few other relaxations. And since then, 6 permits have been issued. So 6 permits, going back to last summer versus 5 from 2014 to 2017. So kind of exponential uptake on that regard. And when we did the public engagement just over a year ago that led to those amendments from last summer, we put out a question in the survey as well too about already floating this idea of pre-reviewed or pre-approved designs, as you will. And that survey from January, February, 270 responses were received, and the vast majority of people are either in support of it or unsure. Only 13% not supporting this idea. And most interestingly, I'd say, is like this number in the bottom left there about the people not only in support but actually think that this would help them to kind of get going with their own laneway housing project. So this idea has been in the community for a bit now, and still, to this day, we get regular phone calls or emails or people dropping by in development services who are asking, whatever happened to those, pre-approved or pre-review designs, and are you still going to do those, and can I buy any today? So there's interest out there, and the idea of the contest then is to promote, quality, literally award-winning designs. At a more affordable price for Nelson homeowners, designs that also incorporate green building techniques. So if you're looking at kind of really the basic stock plans that you could buy from elsewhere, you could get plans for $1,000 or $2,000 for plans that aren't necessarily at all meet Nelson zoning restrictions, that don't incorporate the topography that we have here, that are likely not from British Columbia and it might have building code issues. A lot of issues on that front, and that, quite frankly, are very plain and not necessarily architectural, so to say. As we understand from local architects, to kind of have a custom design for a laneway house, you'd often be paying around $8,000 for that. So there's always going to be people who are going to go for that, for that custom design to get exactly what they want. But the goal, the idea of a pre-approved design then is to offer, really high quality design to people who, either would not be, commissioning a really nice design on their own and or kind of looking at these, stock plans anyway. And for people who are kind of overwhelmed by the whole process, and if they were to go down the path of buying stock plans, that they're going to come up with all kinds of other issues because of code compliance in British Columbia and our zoning, etc., let alone the topography. So by helping those people out, and that big, initial barrier, the overwhelming barrier of, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this. I've never developed anything on my property before, and now I have to go and find an architect or a designer and pay them and work through this process. So it makes it a bit more streamlined to acquire the design, but also on the permit process side is that, we already have permits and we already have plans and designs that have gone through zoning that are high quality, and they've won an award, and they've gone through the building inspectors already as well too for code compliance. So the contest, as we've proposed it here before you, then has 2 rounds, as a lot of these design contests do. One is a conceptual one, kind of recognizing that if you're going to designers and architects are going to put something forward. They don't have a limited time. They're all quite busy, especially in this region, not wanting to take too much of their time if they're not going to win. So let's throw an idea, give us some drawings and explain to us how your design is going to meet the evaluation criteria. Then out of those, however number would be received in the round 1, round 2 boils down to, the design review panel brings it down to 5. So there's 3 prizes and 5 designers or design teams even move on to the second round. In which time then they'll have elaborate designs and show how their plans can adapt to multiple contexts, topographies, and look at the interior and provide a bit more information. Then goes back to the design review panel, the winners are chosen, and if everything goes smoothly, then by early 2020 we have pre-review designs that would be available to the public. We've proposed 3 prizes. The general rule in these things is that second and third prize, the sum of those 2 is equal to the sum of the first prize, and also some non-monetary prizes, so designations, so which plan, the people's choice, at the end putting them out to a public vote. The affordable choice, well, not the plans themselves are all set at $1,000, but which of these designs would be the most affordable to build in our context, and a third designation of the most environmentally friendly design of the 3. We've tentatively, to kind of help show what this would look like, we've got people to agree to be on the design review panel. Their biographies are in the council report. Some of the headliners, so to say, one is an architectural firm out of Calgary that specializes in laneway houses in that city. We also have Ross Chapman, who's agreed. I've seen him speak at at least one conference before in Portland on small housing, and he's the father, creator of this pocket neighborhood movement, of these kinds of things where you have a few urban lots in an existing neighborhood that are consolidated, and you end up with this kind of car-free neighborhood. There's parking and stuff, but it's off to the side. It's all like one little lot for all of these dwellings here. You kind of have this pedestrian mini neighborhood within a neighborhood.
It's like kind of like the one by Rosemont School.
Yeah, exactly. And Ross Chapman has been involved with these, dozens of these around the world. Our other sort of out-of-town headliner, so to say, would be Jake Fry of Smallworks, whose firm has designed hundreds of these and designed and built them as well too in Vancouver, and he's also the co-founder of Small Housing BC, and some of his firm's designs are up there.
So all these folks agreed to do
Yeah.
They have.
Oh yeah, they have. And there's so in the options and alternatives, what staff are recommending, if council wants to go forward with this contest, is to go Canada-wide on it. The reasons being that there's more competition. Realistically, it's not that likely. We're not expecting to have a lot of applicants submissions anyway from Halifax and Newfoundland and Toronto for this scale of contest and this size of city. But by opening it up, we're going to include more, university and student teams as well too. And who knows, if there's good talent from outside as well too who wants to put some time into this, then so be it, and let's look at that. There has been interest from at least one local design firm to limit the contest to the Kootenay specifically, so we've put that as an option as well too. The benefit of that would be really showcasing exclusively local design talent, and that's what they're pushing for, and increasing opportunities for local designers. The drawback is that this isn't a metropolis. We don't, we have a limited number of designers and architects in the region. Not everyone is necessarily going to participate because they're busy. And if we have 5 entrants for 3 prizes, it would be a little underwhelming. They might be great, but the contest aspect would be a little underwhelming. Just a couple more slides here to go over briefly the evaluation criteria as proposed. One is asking for high quality, attractive, but also practical designs. Looking at the neighborhood aspect, that there's good street appeal, that there's that neighbor privacy has been taken into account, and there's the limit bulk and not just have a big box of a laneway house. And also looking at the design from future occupants' perspective, that there's a high quality interior, that it feels homey in there. Thirdly, affordability, and striking that a balance between affordability and environmental design, thinking also about maintaining this thing long term, having plans that are going to be have a long shelf life, that are still going to be desirable in years to come, and that are also adaptable to different lots and neighborhoods and topographies. And finally, the eco design and environmental friendliness aspect of it. And specifically on that, what this contest proposal then includes is having an incentive for laneway houses over 5 meters tall. So generally, to the 2-story laneway houses, we require a development permit process to review for good fit in the neighborhood and context, and that permit fee is $450. So you pay that. We issue the development permit. And the way the step code works is the rating is given after construction when they do the blower door test and check things out and make sure that it's actually achieved efficiency. And what we're proposing then is to refund that $450 development permit fee if they achieve step 3, which means 20% more efficient than conventional design. And then there's also that eco-choice non-monetary prize. Final slide, looking at it from the designers and architects' perspective, why would they want to participate in this thing? Well, there's prize money. If you're looking at, as we understand, architect, being commissioned to design a laneway house, maybe about $8,000. We're looking at prizes between, $5,000, $3,000, $2,000, depending where you land. So there's that, but also the title itself and the exposure. You're looking at really marketing these things locally and making a big deal out of it, not just to promote the designs themselves, but also to use this as a vehicle to kind of showcase the opportunities for laneway housing and put that out there, and the talent as well too, to really showcase that talent. Every time these plans would be used, there's we're proposing a $1,000 royalty, 100% of which goes back to the designer, because we're just, as the city, we've already done the work on the contest. We're giving the plans to the applicant, so they're getting a royalty over time, which would compensate, say if you have the 3rd prize and you've got $2,000 initially, that's not a lot of money. Over time, it'll make a bit more sense, right? And the whole purpose of a prize too is to kind of entice people to kind of get to participate in the contest. Also, the possibility of additional paid work. So the $1,000 royalty is just, okay, here's the plans as are. They're buildable plans, but if there's adjustments, either because of a funky topography or at wish, the request of the homeowner, applicant, then we would be recommending, well, this is who designed these plans, this is the creator of them. You could take them to anyone to modify, but you could also go to this person. And they'd also be permitted to sell these designs outside of city limits at the price of their choosing. And finally, gaining, public experience and competitive design experience, specifically in a growing field of construction. 45% of, one statistic I have in my mind is, when 45% of new single-family home builds in Vancouver are being built with a laneway house at the same time, where you have a bulldozer or a vacant lot, they're going in at the same time. And there's a firm that specializes in Calgary, and it's picking up in Ontario as well too. So, and even Saskatoon and Winnipeg. So across the country, there's more and more of this happening. With densification and housing needs, so it's a good opportunity for designers too. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Woodward.
2 questions. We are saying that we'd give $1,000 in royalties, but we're only charging $1,000.
Yeah.
Right. So it's zero net.
Exactly.
So would we want to charge a little more to cover some administration costs?
It is. It's certainly a possibility. There's a trade-off, right? Obviously, the higher the prices, the more likely that someone is either going to say, "No, I'm not going to bother to do the laneway house," or if I'm going to pay more, I may as well just get my custom design, or that they're going to go for, not super attractive stock plans from elsewhere, and just avoid these designs. It's definitely a consideration. The money that covers the prize, the money of the whole contest, it has been accounted for in Development Services budget already. If Council chooses to go forward with this contest, but the thought is more thinking long term in terms of property tax revenue gain and helping homeowners with their laneway house design project, and actually getting them to take the next step and take the plunge and just do it.
And thank you. And the other question is, laneway houses seemingly would replace a garage, so you wouldn't have a garage. So I'm wondering about long-term parking. That there would be more parking on the street if laneway houses were replacing garages.
If they're replacing garages, yeah, there still are the parking requirements. Those still stand. So if you're building a new house now, that's 2 parking spaces for the house. For the laneway house, it's a 3rd. So you could configure them in different ways. And laneway houses often do include parking. And one of the incentives, if you will, then in the zoning bylaw for that is that the height cap for a laneway house is 5.8 meters, and you can get a little bit more, so 6.1 meters then, in order to properly fit a garage underneath. So to have that above garage suite a possibility, and then having both of those, so to say, the parking and the housing.
Thanks.
Councillor Lockenberg,
Just
and
a
then
small
Councillor
point
Page.
of order. Should we not have a motion first?
Yeah, we can.
Let's move the motion. Or
To get it on the floor, we could move the motion. Do you want to move it?
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay, seconder.
And that would be the, to approve,
Laneway house design. There's actually 2 of them. There's 2 of them here.
yeah, well, let's start with the
I'm going to
first
deal
one.
with the first one. The council approved the laneway house design competition as per the attached document, budget, and tentative timeline. Now, did you want to put the number in here of 3 or 5 or 325?
Sorry.
The designs. You wanted so many designs. You're calling
Oh,
for.
well, just as the resolution just includes the attachment. So as proposed. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes, well, I'll move to approve the project in principle.
Okay. Second by Councillor Woodward. All in favor?
Wait, are we not having a discussion?
Discussion. We're just getting
We
it on
got
the
one
floor.
more to go.
Oh, okay.
No, but we're just getting it on the floor so we
Okay,
can
fair
have
enough. So
questions.
do you want the whole thing on the floor or just part of it?
Just part of it.
Okay,
Now
fair
we're-
enough. Just part of it. Okay.
Okay.
Questions now. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, so I have 2 questions. The first one is the number of approved designs. It kept referring to 3, but there's potentially 6 winners, including the eco and the affordable
Oh, sorry.
winners.
To clarify that, so there's 3 prizes, which are the 1st, 2nd, 3rd.
Yeah.
And then those other designations would be attributed to the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd prize winner.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So there's the three winners. They'll get their cash prize, based on where they rank and everything. And the first prize one might be People's Choice and the Eco Choice, and maybe then the second or third prize winner gets the other one. Okay. So yeah.
So if you have, let's say you have 10, and 8 of them are just great, and the 3 win because they just happen to, somebody's got to win, so they win. Why would we not offer all 8?
It's a question of budget, I suppose, right? To purchase the rights, so in order to bring it into the fold of this program, then with the royalties and call it a City of Nelson or a pre-review design, then there'd normally be prize money involved and some kind of, because we're kind of purchasing the rights, exclusive rights to those plans.
We would be purchasing the rights by offering the royalty, not necessarily by the prize money. So if you're offering the royalty, it doesn't really matter to us if it's 8 or 3 or 20. Does it?
For sure. We didn't think that would be, attractive enough for a lot of designers and architects to take up. That if you're not getting an actual prize, cash prize at the beginning, to kind of give up the rights to this design for $1,000, here and there, might not make sense for them. But we could open it up.
Maybe I'll just clarify. You still offer the prize for the first 3, but if there are 8 that are good, then any of those 8 would get the royalty, so they would be incentivized to participate because they get the chance at the royalty. They may not get the prize, but
My understanding from your presentation was 5 go to final design, if we call it that. So I think we'll have 5 complete designs. And I think if one of them has a completed design, I guess at that stage, if they don't win, they can potentially offer it into our program, or say, we're going to keep this design ourselves, and try to market it ourselves. So I think we could have the option to go back to those 2 and say, do you want to become part of the program? And you get the $1,000 royalty, or you're free to keep the design yourself and sell it yourself. That would seem reasonable.
It would be an option. I think the one consideration would be then that if the prize winners of 1, 2, and 3, they say, look, I got into this contest, kind of assuming, okay, well, look, I'm going to win, and that there's only going to be 3 pre-approved designs, and now you're opening the competition to like 10 or 5 or 10. Then the chances of my design ever getting picked is less, and then they might say, well, I wouldn't have entered the contest.
The flip side is we can look at expanding. I've already reached out to the CBT and said, this seems like something regionally
For sure.
could
That's a good idea.
get involved in and support and replicate it in the other communities in the basin, and that would encourage more small housing across the basin, give these folks more opportunity to sell their designs in other communities. So we'll continue to maybe work with the CBT to expand this program and maybe get them to come in on some of the funding for this program.
Councillor Page.
Yeah, 2 comments, questions. Having just gone through the Strongest Town competition, one of the elements they did to get public engagement was to do 2 tiers where you had your panel and they did their voting, and their voting was weighted. But then the community also had an ability to vote, and that might be a way to address wanting to have a bit of a preference to the local providers, if the community can weigh in and say, well, we want to vote for these as well, and
But
they
it'll
have a
be
little
anonymous.
bit of a say. Gives a bit of a preference that way, I would say.
So the People's Choice, or that we already have it here, it's not a cash prize, but there is going to be a vote. But that happens after the design review panel has announced the winners, and that the anonymity has been lifted. So indeed, along your point, then yes, then the public would know when they're voting, okay, this is a local design, this isn't a local design, and they could take that, or designer, and they could take that into consideration as it stands now. Okay. Yeah, but the public prize, they're not attributing, they're not awarding prize money per se.
Okay, because it does seem important to toss this out broadly and find interesting ideas that aren't within our own echo chamber. My second comment here is is there an opportunity to reach out to some of the hospitality providers? We've had great success coming back from BC Tech offering trips to Nelson. Nelson was just featured as a trip prize on The Price is Right this morning. And so I'm wondering if you want to put people up at the Hume or reach out to those providers at the Adventure and see if people want to, as part of the prize, have a trip or hospitality paid for when they get here.
For designers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Trip to Nelson.
We can ask.
Can you ask?
Yep.
So one of the benefits of having the public participate will be that they'll know that this is actually available. That it's not something that happened in here and is sitting on a shelf over there, and you know, so it'd be important to get that out too. One of the questions that I don't want to jump in here. Was there somebody else?
I'll speak after you. Can I have a question after you?
Okay. Oh, yeah, certainly. A couple of questions I had was, where does the builder, as an example, it's one thing to design a building, but there's a lot of builders out there that are well qualified to say this, even if you chose this design, it doesn't work on this site, right? So where does how does it filter down to that?
Ed Olthoff's on the
To
committee.
the actual when an applicant comes in and they say, I want to build this design.
Committee.
Pardon?
Maybe get a builder on the committee.
We do have a builder on the
Ed
committee.
Olthoff is on the committee.
Yep. Yep.
Who's on it?
Ed Olthoff.
Eddie O's on the.
Oh, yes, okay.
Is that
Yeah.
Okay,
committee?
good. That's good. Yeah, sorry, I missed that.
And Jake Fry as well too. Well, actually, I should say Jake Fry from Vancouver, and also one of the two principal architects from the firm Studio North in Calgary. Both of those firms are design build film firms, so they're not just architects, but they're the ones who actually go out and construct the Laneway house that they've designed.
And the other question is that you mentioned about royalties, and you did mention students potentially at a university might jump on this wagon. How would royalties work?
For a team,
Yeah, for a team.
we would not get involved with that. that is completely up to them. So for a university design team, we would require that they have normally a professor or something as part of their team, not necessarily the leader, but as part of their team to ensure that they're taking everything into account that their profession should, that it's not just first year students, but some of the expertise from yours is at the table as well, and then I think it's written in the rules quite explicitly too that they need to sort that out themselves. So if there's a 2 or 3 person team, then hopefully they divide it up fairly, but we wouldn't want to get involved in that as a city.
Good idea. All right, Councillor Anderson, you had a question.
Yeah, so my biggest question is, okay, first of all, I like the idea. I think laneway housing is a really great solution. My question is because, if we were in Alberta, then to me, okay, that makes sense. We're talking about flat properties, homogeneous topography, but in Nelson, when we look at the topography, it's so diverse. We don't have square lots, we have triangle lots, we have lots that are super steep, we have all of these sort of challenges. And so I know that you'd said that the designs have to be adaptable, but for me, from the limited amount of understanding I have about building, is you always want to design to the site. So I'm just wondering, I know there'll be 3 for people to choose from, but how are we going to make sure that as many people as possible would actually be able to use these designs, even though considering we have really unique topography here?
So through the contest criteria, what we're looking for then, come second round then, is designs that are going to be able to work, both on a generally flat site and on a more sloped site, right? That where the way that the floor plan and the way that the design is laid out, that you could easily kind of chop off, at the lower level, at that kind of slant, and just do away with that extra bedroom or something, so you can build it into a slope. So in those cases, there's quite likely to be either earthwork that's necessary in order to in some cases just build the slant and the slope that the designer was accounting for. that's also, partly up to the designers in this contest too, to go out and, be on the ground and get a sense of Nelson topography and what slope that they should be designing just to kind of average things out, and capture the most, broadest market possible. So to have that adaptability and in more, crazier situations, then that they might have to still, hire someone to work it out, a little bit more, or rehire the original designer to adapt it to that site. That said, though, even though we do have a lot of very unique lots and configurations, there still are quite, a few very standard lots, probably still the majority, right? Fairview, uphill is not necessarily kind of standardized for topography almost, but also standardized lot sizes for the most part. So, yeah, and if you're looking at a flatter property that you could build on a flatter backyard in Rosemont as well too, then a lot of those properties are kind of bigger as well. So that same design could easily work in a Fairview backyard. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a few more questions. My second question is why the first round is just looking at the exterior visual appeal and not the floor layout. It's nice to get something that looks nice, and obviously, but if we go down to 5 and then we find out like you guys are looking and it seems to not make sense, the layouts aren't making sense, why are we, I understand why it wouldn't be a full set of detailed plans would be submitted, but why wouldn't even just a general sketch of the floor plan be included in that initial phase, just to sort of understand what the livability of the space is going to look like?
Good question. So the floor plans, I think a lot of the intent is more about the exterior for this kind of competition, but also the floor plans are something that is a bit more, adaptable, even going forward, even at post-competition, where, a bedroom and a living room can be easily more, changed out and that kind of thing. But I think I would say that the biggest reason is that we're really trying to get as much, high quality, top talent involved in the competition as possible. And to be frank, we were worried about, having too many demands right up front, when you don't know whether, as an architect or designer, you don't know whether there's going to be 10 people entering this contest or 50. And the amount of, listening to our local design community and how busy that they are these days, asking them to do a lot of work up front, we're really worried about scaring people away, to be honest. So we're kind of asking, okay, let's get your idea and then work with it from there. It's a bit of a compromise, but we're not New York or Paris or something. So trying to balance that out.
Totally.
Yeah.
One more question. So Jesse kind of addressed this, but we're not doing cost recovery. I know the 17,000 is within the budget. It is going towards housing, which of course is a huge issue in Nelson, but also the value to, if I'm thinking over the next 10 years, do we even think like 100 of these would be built, And so if we were to put a price tag of 170 added on, so each one of these things, we'd have to get 100 built before we had full cost recovery. Although, of course, through taxation, by building another, we're going to have increased taxation through having that on the lot. I'm just wondering, do we need to be considering the cost recovery, considering it's a fairly small portion of the population that's going to actually reap the benefit of this?
I'd say, well, there's reap the benefit, I guess, a direct benefit, from the homeowner, but the benefit of having more housing as well, and making use of people's backyards who want to make use of their backyards for housing. There are wider benefits for that. It's certainly a discussion that can be had, but in terms of the numbers that we'd be expecting. Looking again at the past, year, not even quite a year yet, so like kind of 6 since last summer. It would be quite imaginable that you'd be looking at like 3 or 4 minimum per year uptake specifically of the pre-approved designs. It's just simply a trade-off. It is simply a trade-off, but I think that there are benefits, financial benefits for the city as well, going longer term and without having to take money directly off of the plans. But if council were to choose to do that, you know, you would still be at $1,070 or something. You wouldn't be any less attractive, right? It's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think council can have that discussion when you set fees, and this council won't be able to dictate what a future council will for,
Of course.
you know, fees for those things. So each council
But-
look at that. The other piece, I think, is just your rental housing. Likelihood is these laneway houses will become part of your rental stock, and that's a positive thing for, you know, whether you're a student or who reaps that benefit. Hopefully it keeps rental costs somewhat reasonable. So I think that's why we're looking at these for just to increase that stock and try to manage you know, housing costs that don't go up. Maybe the others go, I want my house to go up, and these are keeping my houses down. So
In many cases, it's people trying to meet their mortgage commitments as well. That it
Oh,
helps
for
with that
sure.
as well, so.
Yeah.
And laneway houses aren't necessarily, you know, especially per square foot, they're not exactly a cheap endeavor. You know, they're and that's why, you know, we wanted to look at this design aspect, right? You know, we're already not, you know, charging, you know, for connection fees for laneway houses. There's already connection on the lot, and it's a big project, right? You're still installing the kitchen, you're still installing the plumbing, and you know digging up the backyard and yeah, exactly, all those things, getting the hydro connection put in and the sewer connection. It's all of those costs are fixed, whether it's a 3,000 square foot home or a laneway house. So the cost, you know, certainly can be quite daunting, and I think therefore not quite too surprisingly, just on the point of, well, laneway houses being part of the rental stock, is that, you know, we've seen already here a few cases in Nelson, but also a lot more on a bigger scale in Vancouver, is that it's not the laneway houses that go in the rental market, but rather the original house, where, you know, a homeowner, you know, had one case here in Nelson where the homeowner was building their laneway house to be the rental unit, and then was like, oh man, I'd rather live there, and then wanted to move in the laneway house herself and rent out the main house. You know, people who are downsizing, seniors, all kinds of scenarios, right? So the laneway house doesn't just put more laneway houses on the market, but the rental market, but all kinds of shapes and sizes of houses.
But so just to follow up,
aren't you?
I know, I just don't want to be here until 11 o'clock tonight, John. No, okay, but I mean, because I think it's a competition, I think people that are going to be participating in this competition, I think we should be upfront about what this is. And I think, you know, I'm hearing we're going to spend $17,000 and get maybe 3 or 4 laneway houses built a year. And these are people that already own their homes, own their properties, can afford to put 200,000 or 300,000 on, like, you know, can afford to build this. So I'm thinking, why shouldn't we be trying to recover it at a really slow rate, but at $170? So I would like to, you know, by adding that on, so that we are recovering slowly, we're recovering our costs slowly. You know, 170, no one's going to be like, oh, I'm not buying those plans, they're an extra 170. You know, it's 17% on $1,000. And so, you know, and that means that the taxpayers aren't paying it, but the people that are actually building the housing are.
Well, at that, if that's the case, which it probably is, then those people aren't going to be averse to paying $1,500, and let's recover our costs even quicker. Or $2,000.
Then you might
Pick
as
a
well,
number.
yeah.
I think it's just it just seems like, you know, the city's always looking for ways to be more sustainable and financially sustainable, and this would just be a small way, like Councilor Renner said, that to recover some of the costs. As I said in the beginning there, I just feel like there should be a little something there where, just for the admin fees and running the program, and so.
So the design's going to be available for $1,000, right? Each.
again,
You
that
want it more.
Yes.
that fees is going to be in your
Yeah.
bylaws at the end of the
Yeah.
day, so you don't have to make that decision.
So
I don't think we.
I'd like to just to stay focused on what we're doing here rather than the cost at this point.
Yeah.
And we could work on that later, because the concept, we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So I think the concept that you're trying to put forward here has a lot of merit, and no question, I'm with you when it comes to trying to, you know, get our revenue stream returned to us. So maybe if we get through this, then we can work on the other end, because the other end is completely different than the competition.
Mm-hmm.
The competition is a separate piece from the cost recovery piece.
Yeah. And if,
So these resolutions in front of us here wouldn't anchor us into the cost recovery then? Kevin?
I don't believe so. I think
No.
we can communicate with the proponents that, you know, that there may be a min fee for these.
exactly.
Things. And like I said, any council, each year you could say, we want to change the fee.
Right.
You can't restrict that.
Councillor Anderson.
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion on the table, so it states that council approve a laneway house design competition as per the attached documents, comma, with a cost recovery scenario included, comma, budget and tentative timeline. So that, you know, we don't decide on the dollar amount, but we say that we want to start recovering these costs somehow, even if it's slow.
I think you can just do that as a separate resolution. Why don't you do this and pass a resolution to ask staff to bring back some options on cost recovery.
Yeah, or we could just have an amendment. I don't know. Whatever.
That
Yeah.
just seems that
Okay, if that's
Okay?
Yeah,
think
that's
this would
fine.
be cleaner if we do it that way.
okay, that's fine.
So if we're okay with what's being proposed at the moment,
Dennis,
I'm going to
sorry.
call the question on number one. Because I think everybody's had a chance to, that wish to, speak to the staff. All in favor? Carried. Okay, and number two, the council approved the refunding the 450 Laneway Housing Development Permit fee when applicable to the applicant who used the pre-reviewed design archive step 3 or higher of the BC step code. Hey, let me just get this, understand this.
To achieve it, they have to achieve the step 3 or
Yeah,
higher.
So, but just a second, does this put us into the fee scenario before we get to your motion?
Kind of.
this is a fee. Those fees exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this would be waiving those fees. So again, that is passing this benefit on to those homeowners, kind of the opposite of what you were talking about, of adding costs onto
But they're very
their
different.
designs.
So, if you're gonna,
So we can,
we're talking about waiving a fee here, and then we have a potential motion coming on the floor to charge, so that's where I want to get a bit of clarity here, so should we, does this number here add up to what you're talking about?
They're fundamentally different.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think we should move it though and discuss it.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna call the question out then.
No, we'll move in second.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mover and seconder.
Yeah.
Moved by Councillor Lockenberg, seconder. Councillor Woodward, all in favor?
What, we're going to talk about it now.
I thought we had the discussion.
We can have that discussion.
That was on the last part. This is the new part.
Okay, you wanna talk about this one too? Okay,
Just,
go
it will be quick.
Yeah.
ahead. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. So I will, as the mover, I'll sort of defer. What do you say? I
Defer.
refer my comments over to Brittany to finish her.
John's comments.
Yeah, so I think, the beauty of this is that we're incentivizing a higher step code so that these buildings will be more energy efficient. That's why, I think that we like to refund something like this, I think makes a lot of sense because we're incentivizing it. I'd like to make an amendment, or actually, no, first I'm going to ask staff, what could we make this step 4, and what would be the cost to the homeowner for them to be step 4?
I can't tell you what the cost to the homeowner would be
Okay.
at this time.
Yeah.
I'm not a builder, and I think a lot of people, even in town, wouldn't quite know yet because not many people would have the experience of building a laneway house yet to step 4. Okay. And it's one of those things because it's not a prescriptive, code. It's more performative, right? It's really hard. You can't just price it out at the beginning. And but what I can say and why we wanted to, start with step 3, and it'd be certainly possible to amend that. Staff could come back, after the first few sales of their pre-review designs, even and say, look, this is what's going on, and maybe we could look at increasing it at that time. But achieving a higher step is harder the smaller you get in a house. Step 4 for a single family house, larger one, is not an entirely crazy feat to achieve. The smaller you get, you're getting to like 800, 700 square foot buildings, and it gets harder and harder. is what we've heard, many times from the building community. So the way that the step code is designed by the province, hence why we wanted to suggest and propose starting at step 3.
I'll just mention that step 3 is 20% more efficient, and step 4 is 40%. So it's a fairly large jump.
Okay, never mind. That's good. Thanks.
Councillor Lachtenberg.
Just a point of clarification. So first on the cost recovery thing. So I have 2 points. First on the cost recovery thing. These are different issues. In one case, we're sort of marking up a cost that they're going to pay to get the plans, and you said that generally on a custom plan they might be paying, say, $8,000
from an architect specifically.
From an architect.
Yeah.
By offering a pre-approved plan, we're delivering a significant amount of value. And so to Councillor Anderson and Councillor Renwick's point, the difference between 1,000 and 1,500 on a savings of 6 to 8,000 is pretty significant. So it does make sense to recover costs there, and I don't think that would, if they're already saving. The second point is on this $450 development permit, waiving that fee or refunding it to applicants who use a pre-approved design and achieve step 3 or higher. It is related in the sense that we're pushing them to use one of these pre-approved designs. Part of that idea is, again, to speed up the approval process and stuff. So there's some built-in cost savings. So it makes sense to offer a bit of a refunding there. So that's good. So that's all good point in clarifying for me. The last little question I have then is, with the step 4 or pushing that up a little higher, would it not make sense to sort of suggest a higher standard in the design competition so you get designs that are kind of aiming a little higher?
That is definitely there. So under the criteria number 5 under eco design, it's quite clear that that's one of the 5 evaluation criteria, along with the good quality design and the neighborliness and the affordability of building it, right? And I think we laid it out in there that quite explicitly to achieve the highest step of the step code that's possible.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it's entirely possible that we're going to get some that are 4 and I think it would make sense to take a look and see. Because this step code isn't just new for us as a city and council and staff, but also for builders to say, well, we're not even at step 1, let alone 2, and for City of Nelson for new builds. So already jumping to step 3 for an incentive for laneway houses is already a big step. And we can see and how many are able to achieve that, and if they have any issues, and what we can do to help them with that, and if everyone's making it, then let's talk about step 4.
It'll have to be, at the end of the day, the house has to be affordable to put on the ground. I think that was touched on, because if we push it beyond that threshold, it just won't happen. And that's what people.
Push the climate too far.
Pardon?
Just like if we push the climate too far.
Well, I mean, the reality is, most things come down to cost and at the end of the day, and people have to be able to make it work. The numbers work for them as well. And of course, when they're being rented, then any additional cost is passed on to the renter, which it's sort of like a vicious circle, really. But unfortunately, we have to keep a couple of factors in mind. The cost, will it drive people away from building? If it doesn't, then it's going to be passed on to the potential renter, which may drive them out of the market again. So
on the other hand,
sort of a fine line there too.
Absolutely. On the other hand, we're talking about an incentive versus a requirement, right? So if someone, picks, even the eco design, pre-review design, and they get a builder's not, they didn't they didn't really know the step code, and they end up only meeting 1 or 2, even though the design was kind of intended to meet 3. There's not a penalty for it. It's just
on that note. Then, is there a way that to be able to try and you can't accommodate everybody all the time, but potentially you could have a step 4 plan on the desk, step 3, a step 2, or whatever. I mean, that's one of the options that you could have, and it wouldn't mean that step 4 would be number 1 winner. It could be number 3, or there may be number 1. Potentially, if you wanted to have that plan in house, then you could have that.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is staff is working on the whole step code piece on a larger scale. So they'll come back with that. And
So the choice will be made when you go in here, which one you want to
I think you don't want just one,
plan.
everything step 4. If you get 4 designs and they're all step 4 and nobody
Wants to build them.
uptakes, because this is primarily a housing initiative, as and we are looking at
Okay,
energy
I
as
get
part of
that.
that, but it's not the step code program, it's the housing program.
Janice? Councillor Morrison?
Thank you. Just in listening to all the discussion around the table, is that I want to acknowledge that the staff has put a significant amount of work into this. And I don't think that the numbers that they've put in here were just random at the last minute. And I hear this idea of this trying to recover this $17,000 over time that it costs to run this program. But I also think of times when the city spent $17,000 without sort of even batting an eye and not really worried about cost recovery. That aside, as someone who's actually, and then the argument about what does it cost to buy a plan versus not a plan versus a custom plan versus whatever, I can go down to Home Hardware and get the Beaver book, and I can pick out the ugliest, garage and put a suite on top of it for a $500 bill. Like, let's be realistic about what a plan costs. I think that we're looking at potentially architects or residential designers being in this competition, and that we could have something that's really beautiful for Nelson. And if somebody has deep enough pockets to be able to build a laneway house in their backyard and build it with a really nice plan, so be it that they get the plan for $1,000. I just sort of feel like that we start to sort of nickel and dime this to death. And as somebody who's actually built a house from the ground up in Nelson, there are many challenges, and there are a lot of days. You're talking about there are a lot of days when I thought, man, I had an extra $170,000. I started to build my house. It was $10,000 in blasting costs before I'd even started. So I was already $10,000 in the hole before I started. So let's kind of keep this in mind. Let's trust our staff. This is an excellent report. This is right up there with the signed bylaw report. And I think that we need to try this, because let's not fool ourselves. The thing here, as with many of these things, that this is well thought out and we can get all excited about it. What happens if nobody comes to play? Like, we're so many steps ahead of ourselves here. Could we just please pass these 2 motions that are attached here, get on with the rest of the business tonight, let staff see how this plays out. We're not getting this back until 2020. At that time, maybe at that time we find out we have to charge $2,000 a plan. Let's just let staff run with this. Let's see what happens. Let's see how much uptick we get. I think it's a great plan. Let's not kill it with the minutia of other things that we think should be added. I think we just need to run with it for now, without any further additional resolutions or amendments. Thank you.
We don't want to add festive lighting to it?
No, that's optional though for Councillor Anderson if you wanted to make it on there. But I agree with Councillor Morrison. Okay, I'm going to call the question on the number 2. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Anderson.
I'd like to make a resolution, Janice. Yeah, that staff explore cost recovery of the competition, period. And then we can look at pricing later.
Second.
In 2 years' time?
Yeah.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Page. Questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. Thanks very much. Onward and upward.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank
job.
you.
It's really exciting.
Is that seat warm?
That's
It's getting hot.
You did great. Thank you so much.
Good work, Alex.
In front of you next, folks, is the Nelson Daybreak Rotary Multi-Generational Park Project. And as you can see from the information in front of you, this has been talked about for some time, and we have a staff member here if you wish to talk about it. But there is 2 resolutions here. The council approved the request from the Nelson Rotary Daybreak to provide support for phase 1 of the multi-generation Park project by providing up to 5,000 in-kind assistance for project management, administrative, and preparation support.
I'll,
Councillor
Yeah.
Woodward? Yeah. Councillor Renwick? Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favour? Carried. 2, that staff be directed to develop a cost estimate for the remaining phase in the plan as presented by Rotary and refer to council for approval prior to any further action and subsequent phase of the multi-generational park project. Councillor Renwick, Councillor Woodward, all in favour?
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Thought you were saying.
He's first, but I have
Right.
a question too.
Question to staff? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if, looking at these phases and picking up on Councillor Morrison's comment last round about the spray park and the summer and maybe other things that could be used for that, could we maybe get a cost development on what it might take to put like a little cafe up there, like we have down at Lakeside Park? It's quite a busy park and it's quite far from a lot of amenities. I know, I want to put a cafe everywhere.
We're going to be overrun with cafes in this town.
Just a little economic development for Rosemont.
I think we have an idea of all that already with Cottonwood, of what that little building costs.
Okay, yeah.
I think what we'll do is bring back, because we now have somebody else that's interested in doing something in that park, so I think we need that larger look at the park as a whole and what amenities it needs and doesn't need and what the users are, because I think having a playground up at that park has been on the books for a long, long time, and the Rotary is willing to move forward and get that piece off the ground, but I think it also gives us a chance to look at the larger park and make sure we're holistically looking at that park and its needs. So we can look at your cafe if
Councillor Renwick.
Perhaps we can take one of the Laneway housing designs and turn it into Keith's Cafe.
Let's not go down that road again.
on cost recovery.
And cost.
Okay,
and cost.
we're on number 2.
I'm thinking cost recovery.
Questions or comments? Hearing
On these
no more?
books.
I just had one really briefly. So as I understand it, Rotary's going to pay to build the park. The city's part of it is to do management of the build.
Yeah, so they'll probably fundraise. They'll,
Rotary will.
help and maybe we'll let the contract oversee the construction of it, which we would anyway. We don't allow from a liability point of view. The days of volunteers just building things are
Got it.
kind of long gone. Site prep, I think we'd look at, and I doubt there's any servicing costs. I don't know if we're thinking of. I think there's water at that park already, right?
Through you, Your Worship, the benefit is the city will take on the procurement and the project management. A couple of benefits there is that we will realize a 5% savings in GST, and we'll also realize the savings in the procurement of the playground equipment because we have municipal pricing. So their dollars will go further, and it'll also guarantee that we build the facility to a high standard where a volunteer group may not understand municipal standards.
Got it. But to be clear, Rotary would be funding it, and
Correct.
Got it.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I think it's a phased project anyway, isn't it?
The initial phase is for the natural playground, and as Rotary raises funds, we will come back to council to make a request to install other features, yes.
Exactly. Okay, all right. Any more questions? Hearing none. Did I see you lift your arm up there for a second?
No, it's a vote.
All in favor? Carried. Okay. We did number 2, right?
We did number 2.
Yeah, we did them both.
Did both.
All right, so we have the minutes from the various committees over the last
Missed
February.
one.
Nope.
Miss D.
Number 2?
10D.
Sorry?
10D.
10D.
They've all been waiting in the back of the hall for this.
Oh, yes, I beg your pardon, I skipped down there. I can see why you were in the back of the hall waiting for this one. Sorry about that. So here we have Affordable Housing Reserve Fund allocation, potential allocation. Development Service has received 3 requests for financial support from Affordable Housing Reserve Fund for the following proposed affordable housing projects. 805 Nelson Avenue, 47 unit mixed use building. 205 Hall Street, 43 unit mixed use building. 520 Fall Street, 39 unit mixed use building. And the request is, and the recommendation is that Council pass the following resolution that 60% of the funds from the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund be distributed to the three applicants on their per bed basis minus any units that are eligible for Class 3 status from BC assessment as follows. 14,000 allocated to 805 Nelson, 14,776.45 allocated to 805 Nelson Avenue, 17,910.86 allocated to 205 Hall Street, and 12,089.83 allocated to the development of 520 Hall Street.
Subject to use.
Covenant. First, be and register on the title stipulating that the development applies for more Class 3 beds than declared in their application, that the applicant repays the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund on a per bed basis. Any project that does not receive final building permit inspection within the next 5 years must pay back the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund for the full amount. That, folks, is the recommendation, and
I'll move it.
Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Lochtenberg. Questions or comments? What about the mover and seconder? Go ahead, the other side.
Yeah, I have a.
Then we have Councillor Woodward, Councillor Page.
These projects obviously seem to fit the criteria pretty well. So I don't have any issues with the application. I think they seem to fit really strongly. My one question for the proponents is that the amounts seem relatively small given the size of the projects. So I was just wondering about that component. Is it going to make a significant difference? And I'd love to hear what that difference would be.
Do you want staff to answer? Or do you want the applicants to answer?
Yeah, maybe
Staff.
to answer it. Sure.
Sure. You know, this question did come up in the Housing Committee as well. Okay. We did have some discussion around it. From my understanding, although these are really large projects, just because of the increase in construction costs over the last several years, you know, they are all facing some shortfalls. Ultimately, you know, will it swing the needle one way or another? Maybe not. That's something maybe the applicant can answer. But I do think that they're all really great projects and something that the city may want to contribute to. When they're all complete, it will alleviate a number of affordable, like we have a shortage here, and it's been identified in the affordable housing strategy, and they meet the priority groups identified there. And so it's a good project for the city to support if council is in agreement with that. But maybe you want to ask the applicants as well.
It's okay. It was more of a point of curiosity because I do think these are excellent projects. I'm excited to see them. I'm just, you know, hoping that it has some effect, as opposed to some maybe future project that needs to get off the ground in terms of its planning or initial phase. So, but otherwise, I love the project. So,
Councillor Woodward.
Well, I just have a similar sort of question as Councillor Lottenberg said, that you know, as we move forward, that this fund, I'm not sure if we could rearrange it, or that it really could be for you know, getting something going, getting it off the ground, getting that really initial. It could be like the difference of $50,000 could be the difference for a project to go or not, where these projects are already going. So just putting that for the record that I'm so grateful for these projects. We really need the housing, but just for the record, for the future, maybe we could look at this the way the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund is used.
Thank you, Councillor Page and Councillor Morrison.
I have two two questions, and one of them is that question about how we sustainably fund the Housing Reserve Fund. I know there has been discussion already around the Housing Committee about identifying a purpose and role for the Housing Affordability Fund, and so before that conversation has been had at the Housing Committee in its current form, we're already depleting it by 60%, which is maybe a totally valid use as laid out by our policy, but one I feel is a little bit of the cart before the horse, when the Housing Committee would definitely already had identified this as a work priority to have the discussion about what we want to spend this money on. And the second point or question around that is exactly how we create that long-term sustainability of this fund, and what fees and revenues and ways we have within the city to direct funding into it, so that this amount of money represents maybe what is accumulated over a couple of years, and so it's not really such a big deal because we already have the pieces in place to continue to fund it, and in another couple of years we can get a project off the ground. So I think I have a motion after this one, just specifically to come back and say, to ask staff to come back to us and give us some real options on how we can give that long-term viability for the Housing Affordability Fund. But I also think I want to ask if we put this off at least one cycle of meetings to allow the Housing Committee to have a discussion about the purpose of this fund before we disperse these funds.
Just a point of clarification, the staff recommendation came from the Housing Committee, so.
Did it not?
Yeah.
It did come from the Housing Committee, and it is based on the affordable housing policy. So
They
and
could
that,
have recommended 10% or 5% or 0%, so that this did go to the Housing Committee. They,
Yeah, I know.
as far as I understand, had that discussion, made a recommendation. That's the recommendation staff brought forward.
Yeah, I'm referencing back to that it was a really vigorous debate. And I think I think people were around the table at the Housing Committee were really questioning of like, how is this done? And what's the best way that the funds can be used?
So the policy also was changed last year
Yeah.
to open it up to include this. So again, the Housing Committee had
Input into that.
input into that
for sure.
as well.
I'm not trying to change anything here. I'm just saying that moving forward, it would be we can have that further discussion in the Housing Committee.
Yeah. The other thing is it's challenging to ask proponents to put in proposals, et cetera, based on policy that council has. And go through the Housing Committee, et cetera, and it comes back to this table and you want them to revisit it. I don't know if that's necessarily fair to proponents. You know, if you want to change it going forward, you know, I think that's fair.
That's all I'm saying is
I just think we asked these folks to put in proposals. We asked them to do a fair amount of work, and staff reviewed this and took it to the Housing Committee. It's a long way down the track to, and it's recent housing policy that we're applying here.
Supplemental?
A supplemental. I think there's real value to, I think I appreciate all of the time and effort everyone's put into this, but I think there's real value given the fact that so much has changed since the last election, that we simply send this to the next meeting so that the Housing Committee can just have that discussion it was already going to have before this came up on the agenda. Like, it was identified 2 meetings back that we would make this a work priority to figure out what we want to do with these funds. And I'd hate to end up in a situation where we figure we want to bring in a consultant or something else to scan the environment or do a housing report again, and we don't have enough money to do it.
So that's something that can be talked about at the Housing Committee?
Yeah.
You can
Well,
decide
and that's
on-
why
Yeah.
we should bring this back in another month once they've had that discussion. And we might still say yes to it, but
So, just a minute. Okay, you're okay now?
yes.
Okay. Councillor Morris.
Okay. I appreciate what Councillor Page is saying, and I understand that Councillor Woodward was at this meeting. And I just want to say, as a person that sat for a very short time but did sit on the Housing Committee when this policy was coming forward, the members of that committee had an opportunity to look and comment and have feedback on it. It took us a long time to get this policy where it is now. Whether or not it works might be a whole nother ballywick. But the key here is not to have another chat. This is what you've got to use right now. Short of saying, turning down these proponents with this money, and trying to rebuild the policy. This isn't a discussion for the next housing meeting, because you're never going to get a policy change, which then has to come back to us, because it's our policy for that committee. They don't wag the tail this way, we wag the tail that way, right? So then you would be putting off disbursement of these funds for, it's hard to determine. We have in 3 months of being in council probably put more on planning than we did in the last council in 4 years, and I thought we heaped a lot of stuff onto the pile at that point. So I think that you have to go with what you're going. In terms of Councillor Lockenberg, and I'm sure he's read probably all of the housing information since he's been on, is that this policy also has a limit, so we haven't spent all of the money, but there is only 79,000? 90,000, because there's a little bit of extra money that's come flowing in. There's a limit to, there's always got to be some money left in there, so there's only a certain amount that can go out at any one time. So I believe with these 3 offerings that have gone out, it has hit the maximum allowed without sort of depleting and the funds. So yeah, so then that idea of like nobody's ever been against getting sort of the idea of maybe somebody that doesn't already have a project that's kind of in the hopper and putting money there. But we also don't have, we're not Whistler. Nobody left us behind $15 million to start housing projects. I mean, it drives me absolutely almost crazy to hear about, well, Whistler did it. Well, Whistler had like $15 million, not $90,000. So it's a little bit tough to think that we're going to help get a project off. We've used the money in the past to look at doing a housing review. That probably needs to come. But now we've changed the parameters of what this fund is used for. So if you want to have another housing study or update on the housing study, I think at that point we'd have to come back. We can add it to the strategic planning discussion that we're going to have about the city funding the next plan to look at, as opposed to taking it out of this fund, because we finally have a policy. So to change this at this point, it's not just let's meet again next month and toss it around a little bit. It's like, say no to this, go back to the drawing board. The $90,000 will sit there for whatever time it takes until another policy comes back. Or we go forward with this, the 3 proponents that have put the legwork into saying that they could use some money, give them some money to work with, and then have a discussion next month about this policy doesn't work, we need to change the policy and start the drawing board all over again. That's, just from my exposure, I have to say that when I was put on the housing committee in the last term, it's not an area of strength for me. I had to do a lot of reading, trying to get caught up with all of the things that were going on. There seemed to be agreement around the table about this policy. The biggest problem here probably isn't the policy or anything else. It's the fact that we don't have a slush fund of a few $1 million.
It's the revenue.
Yeah.
It's all about the revenue.
It's all about what's in the fund.
And I think you need to keep in mind where our revenue is derived from. And these projects that are in front of us today do not pay into the housing fund. The revenue comes from private development that is charged per door, so much per door to build that fund up. So it's not like we're giving money back to a group that's put money in. We're giving money back to a group that was funded by other projects from the private sector.
And I believe
We're
that's
keeping,
voluntary.
so the housing committee can change those parameters, or make a recommendation to council to change those parameters. So when a private project goes up, you go from, what is it now, Kevin, 500 a door to 1,000 or 2,000?
Well, and even that, I mean, we don't have any, there's no jurisdiction to say that we can enforce that on any builder.
Exactly.
I mean, it
So-
is on a voluntary
You have to
basis, even
understand
that,
where
so.
the money comes from in the first place. If this particular group of projects that was here was paying into the fund so much a door, then you'd be dividing the money up among the 3 of them. But in actual fact, this is money that came from another sector completely.
Yep. And that's why we're having the discussion, is without having that clarity on where the money's going to come from
Exactly.
to replenish.
So I think going forward, I think what Councillor Morrison said makes a lot of sense for us to move this forward today, because if we don't, this is months out
Yeah.
before we would clear this off.
That's
And
It wouldn't be fair.
I think I want,
Councillor Anderson, I'll just give you a shot at it. We haven't had one.
Yeah, and I mean, like if these were sort of three sketchy proposals, Keith, I might be like, yeah, we have to bring this back. These are three proposals that are wonderful. Our community totally needs them, and I think that we should be helping them. Like, to me, this is a no-brainer. And we do have money that's left over in the reserves, but yeah.
I was just going to say that there's still, a significant chunk in there to work on other projects, and I think we can bring this back up in the housing committee, and we're not totally depleting it. It's like there's still something to work with there, and the projects are being helped out, so it's kind of I think it's a good balance down the middle.
So I'm going to call for the question. All in favor? Carried. And a word of caution, think hard before you go off on another housing study, because it's not that long since we did the last one.
So can I still make a follow-up motion to, I'd like to make a motion that staff be directed to report back to council methods and recommendations to fund the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund.
So it's in the housing report, isn't it? That's part of one of our bylaws.
So staff did a comprehensive review
Good, yeah.
of our housing strategy. I'm not sure if everybody's had a chance to look at it. I can't remember what it said about funding, so
Have the
I
answer?
think, yeah.
Fine. Yeah.
And
There you go. Because it was on the list, it was on the mid to long-term list from the original 25
yeah,
or
I've
30
seen it
points.
come
It was
up a few times.
it was like the 16 points that haven't been addressed
Okay.
in totality yet.
Yeah, so we did have staff last year look at our housing strategy, go out and do some best practices research and bring a full report back. I can't remember exactly what it said around
Funding.
the funding of it, but we can talk about that at strategic.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about strategic plan, I just want to make sure that when Jim and Jenny come with another great project, that there's some more funds here to hand out. So.
Good? I think there's, yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, next. Minutes from the various boards, and that's the Library Board, Nelson Housing Committee. There you go.
Move receipt.
Move receipt, Councillor Morrison, seconder, Councillor Renwick. Questions or comments? All in favor? Carried, thanks very much. Action items are on here. If
Move
there's
receipt.
anything you want, okay, fair enough. Moved by Councillor Morrison, second by Councillor Page. Questions or comments? All in favor? Carried, thanks very much. Reports. And as you see here, there's financial department and the building department stats. And you're more than welcome to speak to any one of these. As you can see,
I just,
Yeah, somebody's been
Planning
doing a
department?
lot of.
I just wanna-
very busy in finance.
yeah, I just want to say it's incredible. It's incredible. Every month it goes out.
That's why Colin went on a holiday.
Okay, so anyone want to move receipt or to
Move.
Councillor Morrison, Councillor Renwick, questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? No notice of motions, no late items, council reports. Anybody got anything to report? We did talk tonight about moving those to the committee of the whole.
Yep.
In-camera items to be released to the public, there are none. A motion to adjourn. The arms go off all over the place. Councillor Woodward and Councillor Renwick, all in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Great job, your first night here.
I know, even after my
Sarah,
whole
thanks very
episode.
much. All right.
It's okay, I can keep voting.
Keith?
Yeah.
Do it.
Basically, yeah.
Yes, that was the whole point of the whole thing in the first place. Is are we going to
Chatters.
get back in a substantive way?